Good morning from the Freedom of Information and Privacy Association. I'm Patrick Farnsworth, and this is your Access and Privacy Online News Summary for Saturday, May 2nd. This week, we begin with a developing voter privacy story out of Alberta. Elections Alberta says there was no breach of its own systems, but that a copy of the provincial list of electors provided to a legitimate political recipient may have been used or distributed inappropriately. A court injunction has now ordered the Centurion Project to take down an online database containing voter information and to identify who received or accessed the list. It is a sharp reminder that voter data is not just campaign infrastructure. It is sensitive personal information about people's homes, identities, and participation in democracy. We'll also look at youth privacy and digital citizenship, Manitoba's proposed social media ban for children, a new health research consent system in Nova Scotia, and Ontario's sweeping changes to freedom of information law. And later, we turn to access and whistleblower stories across Canada before closing with U.S. and international developments on voter data, political violence, prediction markets, health data breaches, and child safety online. Let's dive in. We begin in Alberta, where Elections Alberta is responding to what it calls the unauthorized use of the Republican Party of Alberta's copy of the provincial list of electors by the Centurion Project. Elections Alberta says it received credible information on April 27th, suggesting the Centurion Project may have been in possession of a list that had been provided to a registered political party. The next day, the chief electoral officer sent cease and desist directions. On April 29th, Elections Alberta representatives, supported by Edmonton Police Service members, attended a Centurion Project meeting in Edmonton to serve the directive in person. Then on April 30th, Elections Alberta obtained an emergency injunction from the Alberta Court of King's Bench. The order prohibits further access to or use of the list of electors and requires the Centurion Project and the Republican Party of Alberta to identify every person or entity that has received or accessed the list, or any part of it, within 4 days. CBC reports that the database was based on a June 2025 electors list containing information from more than 2.9 million registered Alberta voters. The information included names, addresses, postal codes, unique identifier numbers, electoral divisions, and voting areas. Elections Alberta says there was no breach of its databases or systems. Instead, the matter appears to involve alleged inappropriate use or distribution by a legitimate list recipient. That distinction matters, but it does not make the privacy risk smaller. It is also being reported that Elections Alberta may have had reports on the potential breach as early as March 31st, but closed the files. In our view here at FIPA, the Alberta case shows why voter privacy cannot depend on trust alone, or any electoral authorities to administer. If a list provided lawfully to a political recipient can allegedly move into an accessible database hosted by a third-party group, then privacy protection has failed at the point where it matters most. Voter lists are not ordinary mailing lists. They contain safety-critical information for survivors of intimate partner violence, politically exposed individuals, candidates, election workers, volunteers, and members of targeted communities. As FIPA continues to highlight, breached voter data can increase foreign interference risk. There is no public evidence at this time that foreign actors were involved in the Alberta matter, but once sensitive elector information moves outside lawful controls, the risk profile changes. Information that identifies voters, households, electoral districts, and contact points can be useful to any actor, domestic or foreign, seeking to micro-target, intimidate, impersonate, suppress, or manipulate democratic participation. FIPA has previously raised these concerns through its work with the Foreign Interference Commission, warning that gaps in Canadian law leave sensitive personal information held by political parties and candidates vulnerable to misuse. The Alberta story also lands in the middle of a national debate over political party privacy rules. Recent Ipsos polling conducted for FIPA, the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, the Centre for Digital Rights, and Open Media found that only 10% of Canadians prefer a self regulatory model for federal political parties, while 68% support legislated privacy requirements with strong independent oversight. FIPA is calling for political parties to be subject to enforceable privacy obligations, including access and correction rights, safeguards that follow voter data wherever it goes, breach notification, independent oversight, and clear accountability for parties, vendors, data brokers, and third parties. Canadians can learn more at voterprivacy.ca. That is voterprivacy.ca. And FIPA is encouraging people concerned about political privacy to sign House of Commons petition E-7237. Turning to British Columbia, Rachel Lizowski, local journalism initiative reporter with the Valley Voice, reports that students at Nakusp Secondary School are learning practical emergency skills, including ground search and rescue, first aid, fire suppression, swift water rescue, and drone piloting. And those skills also include a privacy and digital literacy thread. Across School District 10, Learning Technologies teacher Erin Collinson has been delivering digital media citizenship presentations at every school in the district. These sessions focus on responsible online behavior, safety, critical thinking, protecting personal information, and evaluating online information for credibility and accuracy to raise students' tech confidence. It is a useful reminder that privacy education is not just about compliance. For students, digital citizenship is becoming part of basic civic readiness. Meanwhile, in Manitoba, Maggie McIntosh, local journalism initiative reporter with the Winnipeg Free Press, reports that Premier Wabkanu's proposal to ban children and youth aged 15 and younger from social media and AI chatbots is getting both support and pushback. The Canadian Centre for Child Protection and parent advocacy groups have welcomed the idea, but young people are asking practical questions. Within 48 hours of the announcement made during an NDP fundraiser, at least one student-initiated petition had been organized to, quote, protect our children's right to a connected, informed future, end quote. Students interviewed by the Free Press indicated that if children are being exposed to screens, they need online safety education, and they acknowledge the harms of social media, including cyberbullying, unrealistic content, and graphic material. They also question how a ban would be enforced, whether it would be effective, and what supports would exist for youth who continue to use platforms. One teen even noted that many adults post photos and other personal information about their children online. The privacy issue is enforcement. Law and technology scholar Katie Salaji at the University of Manitoba warned that age verification systems can create cybersecurity concerns and may shift attention away from platform accountability, algorithmic transparency, and the design choices that make platforms addictive. She also voiced concerns the province will copy and paste what's been created in Australia. The Manitoba debate reflects a broader challenge. Governments are under pressure to protect children online. This includes restricting inappropriate content, such as violence and nudity, from being posted. But rules aimed at keeping children off platforms may require platforms to collect or infer even more sensitive information about young users. Next, in Nova Scotia, Canadian Press reports that residents can now opt in to clinical trials and other health research through a new consent system tied to the province health card process. Premier Tim Houston says the province hopes the system will accelerate medical innovation and make Nova Scotia a leader in health research. Residents can consent to be contacted about clinical trials, allow biological samples and health information to support research, or permit approved organizations and businesses to use health information in developing new drugs, devices, and technologies. Health officials say every research project will still require comprehensive review and that participation is voluntary, limited to people 19 and older, and can be changed or withdrawn. One doctor said protecting privacy is a top priority throughout this endeavor. The potential benefit is faster research and better matching of participants to studies. Previously, researchers seeking access to health records had to go through a largely manual, paper-based process. Health officials say this new approach is sure to speed things up. The privacy challenge is ensuring that consent is meaningful, granular, and understandable, especially when health records, biological samples, private companies, and future research uses may all be involved. In health research, trust depends on more than innovation. It depends on people knowing what they have agreed to, who can access their information, and how they can change their mind. Next, we turn now to Ontario, where the Ford government's changes to freedom of information law have moved from controversy to law. Ontario has passed legislation making records of the Premier, cabinet ministers, and their staff secret under freedom of information law. The changes were included in a budget bill, passed after the government skipped the committee stage, refused public hearings, and used a late night sitting to speed the legislation through. The law applies retroactively to 1988. That means it can nullify current freedom of information requests, even requests made years ago. The government scheduled a late night sitting for the third and final reading of the bill. This came after it skipped the committee stage, when affected groups and members of the public have a chance to weigh in, and committee members from the government and opposition can propose and debate amendments. Premier Doug Ford has acknowledged that part of the rationale was to stop a global news request seeking his cell phone records. Those records have been the subject of a court order requiring the Premier to provide government-related call logs for review by Ontario's Information and Privacy Commissioner. Ford and his ministers say the changes are needed to protect cabinet confidentiality and personal information. Ford is consistently using the excuse of protecting the personal information of constituents who call or text him, even though that information is already being protected by existing and previous privacy laws. The same day, opposition parties also called on Ford to apologize after he directed personal insults at Liberal MPP Stephanie Smith during debate over the law. Smith, a former broadcast journalist, had asked why a premier who claims to be accountable was making it harder to hold him to account. Ford responded by saying that the reason Smith is in the legislature is because, quote, CP24 didn't want her anymore, end quote. While the political theater drew attention, the larger accountability issue is the law itself. Ontario Information and Privacy Commissioner Patricia Kosame has warned that if records about government business can be shielded simply because they sit in a minister's office, on a staffer's device, or in a political account, public accountability is eviscerated. She also warned that the exclusion could limit her office's ability to oversee how the province handles Ontarians' personal information, essentially allowing the government to police itself. This could increase cybersecurity and data breach risks if sensitive records migrate to personal devices or informal channels. Local Journalism Initiative reporting shows the issue is also moving beyond Queen's Park. Sue Nielsen, Local Journalism Initiative reporter with the Temiskaming Speaker, reports that a new Liskyard rally formed part of a province-wide protest against Ford government policies. Protesters pointed to the freedom of information changes, the Greenbelt scandal, education and healthcare concerns, and other issues. Temiskaming Cochrane MPP John Vanthoff told the crowd that the FOI changes were not a normal policy change, saying sunshine is the best disinfectant, and calling the budget passage a very dark day. He also said protesters are particularly upset about the Freedom of Information Act changes. In Lambton County, Blake Ellis, Local Journalism Initiative reporter with the Petrolia Lambton Independent, reports that a protest outside the MPP office was about so much more than the proposed York 1 landfill near Dresden. The group was particularly vocal about Bill 5, which included a clause removing a planned, full environmental assessment of the former Dresden dump, pushing the York 1 project forward. Those interviewed said the local landfill issue brought people out, but that concerns now include environmental regulation, education, healthcare, and the Ford government's move to stop access requests for records held by the Premier and cabinet ministers. And Michelle Dory-Forstel, Local Journalism Initiative reporter with thekingstonist.com, reports that Hastings Lennox and Addington MPP Rick Bressie defends the FOI overhaul as a matter of clarity, not reduced access. Bressie said formal government actions, contracts, agreements, and payments would remain public, but he acknowledged that conversations between elected officials, including cabinet ministers, would be excluded. FIPA and others recognize these distinctions miss the point. Freedom of information is not only about the final contract or payment. It is often about how decisions were made, who was involved, what was considered, and whether private influence shaped public outcomes. The amendment also means that records held within ministers' offices could fall outside not only access to information rules, but also the safeguards governing the management of personal data. The result is a significant shift in Ontario's access regime, from a system where government records could be tested through independent oversight to one where entire categories of political records may now fall outside the law altogether. Staying in Ontario, Canadian Press reports that Toronto Police Constable Timothy Barnhart will remain behind bars after a bail review in Ontario Superior Court. Barnhart is one of 8 active and retired Toronto police officers charged in Project South, an organized crime and corruption investigation led by York Regional Police. He faces 17 charges, including offenses related to cocaine trafficking and bribery, as well as allegedly handing personal information to a criminal network with international ties. The evidence and arguments are covered by a publication ban, but the case underscores why access to personal information by law enforcement personnel must be tightly controlled, audited, and accountable. In Essex, Silene Argent, local journalism initiative reporter with the Essex Free Press, reports that Town Council has approved a bylaw allowing Jetwave, a personal watercraft rental business, to lease space at Colchester Harbor. Council took 2 weeks and got information from the public and boaters about the opportunity. The decision followed public feedback and council debate over safety, swimmers, boaters, wildlife, harbor congestion, and privacy concerns raised by regular boaters. The deputy mayor declared a conflict of interest as he owns a business down at the harbor. The story is local, but it illustrates a recurring municipal transparency issue. When public space is leased for private commercial use, residents expect clear information about safety conditions, liability, enforcement, public consultation, and how council weighed competing interests. In Chatham, Kent, Michael Bennett, local journalism initiative reporter with the Ridgetown Independent News, reports that nominations have opened for the reshaped 2026 municipal election. The next council will have 3 fewer councillors, with representation dropping from 17 to 14. Ward boundaries have also been redrawn, including major changes in Chatham proper and the merging of parts of East Kent and South Kent. Along with voting for a mayor and 14 councillors, residents will also be electing school board trustees based on their chosen school board jurisdiction. Candidates must file nomination documents, collect 25 endorsement signatures, provide identification, and consent to release personal information. That last point is a practical reminder that running for office involves privacy trade-offs. Public accountability requires disclosure, but election systems must still handle candidate and voter information carefully and lawfully. Candidates cannot begin campaigning until nomination papers have been officially filed, and campaign signs cannot be displayed until August 27th. And in Almaguin, Sarah Cook, local journalism initiative reporter with NorthBayNipissing.com, reports on a candidate information session hosted by the Almaguin Clerks Group. The session emphasized that serving on council is a major commitment, that councillors are one vote at a table rather than one-person decision makers, and that municipal powers are limited by provincial law. It also offered a blunt access to information warning. Once someone runs for council, they become a public figure. Under Ontario's Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, the public may have access to council members' correspondence, including email. The advice from clerks was simple: do not say or write anything you would not say out loud in a public meeting. It was also reminded that conflicts of interest must be stated, and that person must stay out of the discussion and not vote. Failing to do so can end in court. Finally, in the Ontario spotlight, Mohammed Hamza, local journalism initiative reporter, and Joel Whitnebel at The Pointer report that Brampton Mayor Patrick Brown and Councillor Rowena Santos have not acted on the Ontario Ombudsman direction to revisit cancelled forensic investigations into alleged financial wrongdoing at City Hall. The investigations related to contracts and hiring decisions connected to the failed Brampton University project. Preliminary findings from the Fro's forensic partners raised concerns about procurement, conflict of interest, and whether contracted work was completed. It was found Rob Godfrey and David Wheeler were given unfair advantages when contracts were handed to them. Brown called a special council meeting in August 2022 and, with allies including Santos, voted to cancel 6 forensic investigations. Both Brown and Santos were implicated in the matters under review. The ombudsman later encouraged the city to revisit the decision and ensure outstanding concerns were comprehensively investigated and addressed at the municipal level. Residents quoted by the pointer say the issue is about public money, transparency, and confidence in City Hall. Residents also demanded answers ahead of the election, and many questioned how Brown and Santos were even allowed to vote on a matter that directly impacted them, enabling them to avoid a possible finding of wrongdoing weeks before Brampton had to choose its future council. The broader democratic principle is straightforward. Public officials should not be able to shut down scrutiny into their own conduct without clear, independent accountability. Turning to broader Canadian access and whistleblower stories starting in British Columbia. LNG Canada has been ordered to identify the root causes of black smoke flaring from its Kitimat facility and implement measures to prevent it by October. The access to information angle is significant. Monthly emissions reports obtained by University of Victoria air quality researcher Laura Minute through Freedom of Information showed flaring exceeded permitted volumes between last October and January. The BC Energy Regulator issued the order after an inspection found at least 2 instances of noncompliance with LNG Canada's permit, including one flaring event in January that lasted more than 7 hours. The company confirmed that the regulator identified 2 instances where black smoke went unreported since the facility startup. Environmental and healthcare advocates have raised concerns over the potential impacts of pollutants released through flaring. An earlier statement from LNG Canada in response to the release of the emissions reports said increased flaring is normal during the facility's early operations phase, and it would drop significantly in normal operations. Those records help bring more detail into public view, including the scale of the exceedances by flare type. The regulator has ordered LNG Canada to report all black smoke flaring lasting 15 minutes or longer, submit a root cause report by August 15th, and implement prevention measures by October 15th. For communities near major industrial projects, environmental accountability depends on timely reporting, enforceable permit conditions, and public access to records that show what is happening. In Alberta, Brett McKay, local journalism initiative reporter with the Investigative Journalism Foundation, reports that 41 school divisions removed books from libraries to comply with the provincial order. The documents, released through an access to information request, show that more than 170 books were pulled from shelves, including graphic novels, poetry collections, and adaptations of works such as George Orwell's 1984. Several titles that school divisions reported they intended to remove were redacted in the documents released by Alberta Education under Section 29 of the Access to Information Act, dealing with advice to the minister. Education and Childcare Minister Dimitrios Nicolaides had directed schools to remove library materials containing visual depictions of sexual acts by January 5th. School divisions were also required to submit lists of materials they planned to remove. The reporting shows wide variation in how school authorities interpreted and applied the order. Some titles were removed by many divisions, while others were removed out of an abundance of caution. The president of PEN Canada indicates that the ministerial order is inherently vague, and the question of what makes an image sexually explicit varies over time and according to who is making the judgment. Several school divisions reported that 1 or 2 panels in a graphic novel triggered removal. Penn says, quote, "Snippets of these books are ripped out of context to shock the public," end quote. Some titles were redacted in the records released by Alberta Education, and 3 school divisions lists were fully redacted under the Access Law's Advice to Minister provision. The story shows how access to information requests can reveal the practical effects of government directives and that some public bodies enabled by provincial legislation are keeping secret lists of banned material. Next, in Newfoundland and Labrador, the provincial government has approved increases in greenhouse gas emissions at both a nickel mine in Labrador and the Cenovus-owned White Rose oil field off the coast of St. John's. Documents obtained through access to information legislation show Cenovus estimates its new West White Rose platform will increase emissions at the oil field by about 21% at peak operation, roughly 100,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. That is about the same as emissions from more than 23,300 vehicles driven for a year, using U.S. Environmental Protection Agency estimates cited in the reporting. The West White Rose project has been praised for jobs and for extending the life of the oil field by about 14 years. Its effect on greenhouse gas emissions has not been as widely discussed. The record's access show a less publicized side of the decision, the emissions baseline changes that have been approved by government. It is important to note that climate change is fueling extreme weather across Canada, including in Newfoundland and Labrador, where wildfires destroyed more than 200 structures last year, and Hurricane Fiona ravaged the southwestern tip of the island in 2022 as a post tropical storm. Again, the transparency issue is not abstract. Public debate about industrial expansion depends on people being able to see the environmental assumptions, emissions estimates, and regulatory choices behind the headlines. And nationally, Canadian press reporter Jim Bronskill reports that a federal review is urging Ottawa to bring the military and key intelligence agencies under Canada's public sector whistleblower law. The report recommends that the Canadian Armed Forces, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, and the Communications Security Establishment be included in the Public Servants Disclosure Protection Act. Those organizations are currently excluded and must instead maintain internal processes for reporting wrongdoing. The law allows federal employees to make a disclosure of wrongdoing or file a complaint of reprisal with the Public Sector Integrity Commissioner. The review says improvements to the law are urgently needed, and that the current system does not give public servants the sense of security needed to promote a culture of integrity. Many public servants said they were unaware of the law, feared reprisal, or doubted that disclosing wrongdoing would make a difference. The report also recommends clearer roles and responsibilities, procedural fairness in investigations, and public reporting on misconduct and wrongdoing while protecting individual privacy. The report recommends the government redraft the act to make it easier to read, understand, and administer. It also recommends that all organizations publish information on reported misconduct and wrongdoing, including the actions taken in response, while ensuring individual privacy is protected through anonymization or other approaches. Whistleblower protections matter most where disclosure is hardest. National security institutions handle sensitive information, but secrecy should not mean employees lack safe, independent channels to report wrongdoing. Now to international stories. Prediction markets are facing renewed scrutiny after a U.S. Special Forces soldier was charged with using classified information about the capture of former Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro to place bets on Polymarket. The soldier allegedly made more than $400,000 after betting on Maduro's downfall. The company has maintained that insider trading has no place on its platform after determining that someone had traded on classified government information and Polymarket cooperated with the investigation. Prediction markets allow users to buy and sell event contracts on outcomes ranging from elections and sports to geopolitical events. The platforms are regulated differently than traditional gambling because the contracts are treated as derivatives rather than state-regulated wagers. Critics say that creates a loophole, especially as users can bet around the clock on politics, conflict, and public crises. Lawmakers in Washington have introduced proposals for stronger guardrails, including bans on bets related to war, assassinations, or terrorist attacks. President Donald Trump's administration has already thrown its support behind prediction market company operators and sued 3 states over their efforts to regulate them further. The privacy issue is also real. Prediction platforms collect personal information to verify identity and payments, while also allowing many users to trade publicly under pseudonyms. That mix of identity verification, anonymous public activity, financial speculation, and political events creates a fast-moving regulatory challenge. Next, in Alaska, voting and civil rights groups have sued state election officials over the sharing of Alaska's full voter registration list with the U.S. Department of Justice. The lawsuit alleges that disclosing detailed voter data, including information such as dates of birth, driver's license numbers, or partial social security numbers, violates Alaska's constitutional right to privacy. The Justice Department has sued at least 30 states and the District of Columbia to try to force the release of the data, according to a tally by the Brennan Center. Judges have rejected those efforts in California, Massachusetts, Michigan, Oregon, and most recently, Rhode Island. The League of Women Voters of Alaska and the Alaska Black Caucus also argue that the agreement with the Justice Department creates due process concerns by allowing federal officers to flag voters for removal without clear notice or a process to challenge those decisions. The plaintiffs are represented by the American Civil Liberties Union of Alaska, ACLU Voting Rights Project, and the Electronic Privacy Information Center. The Alaska case closely echoes concerns raised in Canada this week. Voter data is collected for election administration, but that does not mean it should move freely between institutions without necessity, safeguards, transparency, and oversight. Next, nearly a year after the assassination of State Representative Melissa Hortman, lawmakers across the United States are increasing security at state capitals and their communities. In Minnesota, most doors at the state capitol are now locked, and people entering must pass through weapons detectors. Other states have allowed campaign funds to be used for personal security, and some are moving to protect lawmakers' home addresses and personal information. While the story is about political violence, it is also about access to democratic spaces. Security measures may be necessary, but when legislatures become harder to enter and elected officials become harder to reach, democracies must balance safety with openness, transparency, and public accountability. The NCSL created a $1.5 million fund to reimburse legislatures for expenses related to lawmakers' personal safety and security while they're away from their state houses. In Washington, the U.S. Justice Department's internal watchdog is reviewing the department's compliance with a law requiring the release of Jeffrey Epstein-related files. The audit will look at how the department collected, reviewed, redacted, and released records, including how it handled concerns after survivors said personal information about them had been disclosed. The release process has been uneven. The department initially released only a fraction of records within the required 30-day timeline, later said it had discovered a much larger tranche of supposedly 3,000 pages of records, and then withdrew thousands of documents and media after lawyers warned that nearly 100 survivors had been harmed by careless redactions. The exposed materials include nude photos with faces visible, as well as names, email addresses, and other identifying information that was either unredacted or not fully obscured. The case is a stark example of the tension between transparency and privacy. Public access to records can be essential for accountability, but disclosure systems must also protect survivors, victims, and other people whose sensitive personal information appears in public interest files. In the United Kingdom, DNA and other confidential health data from 500,000 people who volunteered for the UK Biobank Health study was offered for sale online in China after a data breach. UK Biobank is the world's most comprehensive dataset of biological, health, and lifestyle information and has been used to achieve improvements in detection and treatment of dementia, cancers, and Parkinson's. The British government says names, addresses, contact details, and phone numbers were not included, but officials could not guarantee that nobody could be identified because the data may include gender, age, month, and year of birth, socioeconomic status, lifestyle habits, and biological sample measures. The data had been legitimately downloaded by 3 research institutions in China, which have now had access revoked. UK Biobank has temporarily closed access to its research platform and says additional security measures will be added. The breach underscores the trust bargain at the heart of health research. People may be willing to contribute deeply personal information to advance science, but that trust depends on strict access controls, strong stewardship, and consequences when data is misused. And finally, in Indonesia, Associated Press reporter Edna Taragan reports that the government is urging social media platforms to disclose how many accounts have been suspended under new rules restricting access for children under 16. Indonesia began implementing their restrictions at the end of March, targeting platforms that could expose children to pornography, cyberbullying, scams, or addiction. TikTok says it has deactivated 1.7 million accounts belonging to children under 16. Indonesia says 7 of 8 high-risk platforms have committed to restricting access, while Roblox has not yet agreed. YouTube announced its commitment to restricting access for younger users after the restrictions took effect, but has not yet specified how many accounts belonging to children were identified and suspended. The government says public reporting is needed for transparency. Digital rights advocates warn that enforcement raises privacy and data security concerns because reliable age verification often requires collecting sensitive personal information. The Indonesian government has said it would allow platforms to determine their own methods for account verification. Even so, some children will find a way to use fake identification, such as using their parents' account. As with the Manitoba debate, the essential question is not whether children should be safer online. They should. The question is how to build safer digital spaces without creating new risks through expanded surveillance, identity checks, and data collection. That's it for this week's Access and Privacy Online News Summary. Thank you for listening, and thank you for following the stories that shape privacy, transparency, and democratic accountability in Canada and around the world. You can find more coverage, resources, and links through FIPA's website. You can also support this work by subscribing to our news monitoring, sharing the podcast, or making a donation to help keep these public interest resources available. This episode was written by Sean Fisk. Music is by Breakmaster Cylinder. I'm Patrick Farnsworth for the Freedom of Information and Privacy Association. Thanks again for joining us. Stay safe and stay informed.